Kremlinology. Being accustomed to criticism from political flanks, I rarely engage with invective, but I feel compelled to respond to Samuel Moyn's shallow and superficial review of my book, The Folly of Realism, Casus Belli, August, because Harper's Magazine is a widely respected and storied publication. Moyn's review is less a critique of my book than a reflection of his casual approach to the history and stakes of the Russia-Ukraine war. In dismissing my deep historical research as wish-casting, Moyn substitutes glib labels and ideological caricature for genuine engagement with the arguments I present. The Folly of Realism is a well-documented historical analysis of 3 decades of U.S. policy towards Russia and Ukraine, tracing how successive administrations, both Republican and Democratic, embraced a Russia-first framework that repeatedly sacrificed Ukrainian security and U.S. national interests in exchange for misplaced hopes and short-term calculations. Moyn does not dispute the substance of this argument. Instead, he characterizes American policy in Eastern Europe as either reckless escalation or willful ignorance of historical constraints, neither of which I can accept. My book is not a manifesto for American militarism. It is a sober account of how deference to Moscow, cloaked in realist thinking, created the permissive environment for Putin's full-scale invasion in 2022. Moyn's review is particularly superficial in 2 respects. First, he dismisses the extensive record, official documents, and contemporaneous accounts that reveals a bipartisan tendency to subordinate Ukrainian interests to Moscow's sensitivities. He writes as though the choices of the 90s and aughts were foreordained, rejecting alternative paths without evidence. Second, he claims that robust U.S. support for Ukraine was either futile or provocative, ignores a central point. Deference depends as much on demonstrated will as on capabilities. Washington's failure to integrate Ukraine into a broader security architecture and its repeated indulgence of Russian aggression for 2 decades sent precisely the wrong signal. To reduce the line of analysis to a series of non-existent alternatives is to avoid grappling with my book's core contention, that the consistent U.S. underestimation of Russian revanchism, coupled with reluctance to support vulnerable states like Ukraine, amounted to a long-term strategic blunder. It is easier to caricature my argument as repackaged neoconservatism or as rampant liberalism than to confront the uncomfortable reality that so-called realism has produced catastrophic results, not stability. Superficial commentary masquerading as a review does little to advance an honest debate about how the United States should navigate a dangerous world. Readers deserve better than Moyn's casual dismissal and ideological shorthand. I invite him to examine The Folly of Realism and decide for themselves whether America's failures in the post-Soviet space stemmed from an excess of idealism or from the realist complacency Moyn appears intent on defending. Alexander S. Vindman, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Samuel Moyn responds, Alexander Vindman's adjective game is excellent, but his letter adds no new arguments other than the unconvincing ones my review already rejected. For Vindman, our age has suffered from a surfeit of realism, but he had better prepare for a lot more of it. As for me, a better reader than Vindman would have seen that I am an idealist too, just not one who refuses to learn from experience and history. An unchastened and uncorrected idealism like Vindman's can make things worse, and is of no use at a moment when Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump are meeting to see what kind of bad deal for Ukraine is available as an alternative to an endless war. Idealists help put Ukraine in this position. They need to play the long game and learn from their recent mistakes.